Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 211 and I am the show's host Kyle. This episode and this week kick off a 3-part series that I did on Russiagate, going through and debunking all the narratives that allege Russian collusion with the Trump administration influencing and changing the results of the 2016 election. And to do that, I have on the hosts of the Around the Empire podcast, Joanne and Dan Wright. They do an excellent job of going through all the details, and I broke it down to 3 parts. The first part, this episode will focus on the indictments of Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Rick Gates, and Paul Manafort, as well as the indictments related to the Internet Research Agency. And then we'll also cover the Trump Tower meeting, as well as Fusion GPS and the Steele dossier. So there's a lot in this episode. There's really going to be a lot in all these episodes. They're absolutely fantastic, and I think you'll really enjoy them. As always, the show can be found at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com and libertarianinstitute.org. Joining me on today's episode of Foreign Policy Focus are the co-hosts of the Around the Empire podcast, Joanne and Dan Wright. How are you two doing today?
Hey, thanks for having us on.
Hey, Kyle. Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I brought you on the show today to talk about Russiagate, something that you've covered really well on several episodes of your podcast, Around the Empire, which I really enjoy listening to and could be found at aroundtheempire.com. Several recent episodes that I'll link to in the show notes page. On episode 57, you had Garland Nixon on your show. On episode 54, you covered Hurricane Crossfire. And so for those of you who want really detailed analysis on this, you could check out those shows. So, Russiagate has been going on for a long time now. I mean, if you really want to go back to when the FBI kind of started investigating Trump and you had the DNC email leaks, I mean, you're really coming up here on 2 years, I guess, that we've had all this stuff in the news. And so it's a lot to cover. It's a lot to remember because every month, there's this big bombshell report, and CNN and MSNBC are out there saying they got Trump. Collusion is proved. He definitely, used Russia to help him win the election, or is a Russian puppet, and that's how he won the election. And so on today's show, we're just kind of going to go through it and explain how, that really hasn't been proven yet. So, are you guys ready to do this?
Let's do it.
Ready to go.
All right. So we'll start with, these group of indictments on former Trump, either campaign officials or administration officials. There's the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, and Manafort, and then his associate Gates. And so I guess maybe start with Flynn and just kind of, the accusations that Flynn was talking to the Russian ambassador and lied to the FBI, and now the FBI's got him.
Well, I don't with Paul okay, so there's a few different ones. So some people are no one yet has been indicted, it should be noted, for actually at least no American. We can go into these Russians that were indicted in a second, but none of these Americans who are affiliated with the Trump campaign have been indicted for actually interfering or rigging the election. Paul Manafort has been indicted primarily for his work in Ukraine for the former ousted president Viktor Yanukovych. He's under indictment for money laundering. He apparently, because he was texting with someone, he's now also been indicted for witness tampering. But that witness tampering is for his case about his work in Ukraine, which happened years ago, well before 2016, well before Trump even entered the race. The president was deposed in 2014, I believe, Viktor Yanukovych. So this is well before. So he did, and now there's considerable evidence he engaged in tax fraud and money laundering regarding his work in Ukraine, but that has nothing to do with the Trump campaign. Michael Flynn has been indicted for lying to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, which was made public and because someone leaked an intercepted phone call from the NSA. Papadopoulos has been also indicted not for collusion with the Russians or interference, but also for lying to the FBI. So there has been indictments in the special prosecutor probe with Mueller's probe, but none of them have been actually directly related to this supposed collusion or Russiagate conspiracy. All of them have been either for crimes that occurred years ago in Manafort's case and Gates' case, or in people misstating or lying to the FBI during the course of the investigation So they all are getting indicted, but they're not indicted for anything having to do with rigging the 2016 election or hacking the DNC or any kind of malfeasance related to the election. To sum it up.
And in total, there are 5 guilty pleas. I think all of those guilty pleas are related to lying, right? 20 indictments and 100 charges. So it sounds like it's really serious, but when you look into the details of it, you're like, okay, this is the Trump collusion with Russia to meddle in the election investigation, right? Well, where are the indictments for that? We still haven't seen them.
Right. It's kind of like with the previous special prosecutor. A lot of people will remember the Bill Clinton impeachment hearings about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. He was actually impeached or for perjury for lying to, investigators, not for the crime which, while sexually improprietous or bad for a boss to do to his, or be in a relationship with a subordinate is not a crime. So his actual sexual relationship with Lewinsky was not a crime. It was his lying to an investigator, which was perjury or making a false statement under oath, that was a crime and got him impeached. And also, I think he was disbarred temporarily. He may still be disbarred. So, it's a sort of process crime. It's not the actual crime itself. So there have been people in the Trump campaign who have gotten process crimes, lying to investigators, but no one has actually been charged with, we interfered in the election, we swung votes, we changed some kind of electoral outcome. No one has been indicted for that. The closest thing to that is these Russians who ran this internet research agency who were indicted for using false information or using kind of cutouts to buy ads on Facebook, most of which ran after the election. And it's not even clear that these ads were meant to swing votes. A lot of them were kind of comical. My favorite is Buff Bernie, which is Bernie Sanders in rainbow attire in front of the White House making a muscular Hulk Hogan pose. So they're the only people who've actually been indicted, I guess, for trying to influence public opinion, which if you look at the kind of money we're talking about, I mean, this is like a joke. The Clinton campaign and even the Trump campaign spent millions of dollars. I think Clinton spent close to $1 billion. And these people, a few $1,000s. I mean, it's just not serious money, these little Facebook ads. So they've been indicted somewhat related to influencing the outcome of the election, but no one in the Trump campaign has been indicted for that. So for people playing at home, no one has actually been indicted for the collusion part of Russiagate.
And
hopefully that cleared something up.
That internet research agency in St. Petersburg, there were individuals indicted, and there were also 3 companies indicted. And the Facebook ads themselves, they spent around $100,000 on Facebook ads. More than half of those were after the election, and the rest of it, I'm getting this from Aaron Mate's latest article on The Nation. And then the bulk of he says the bulk of the remaining 46,000 in ads ran during the primaries. And the majority of the ads did not even reference the election. And they didn't get much play either. So Mueller indicted these 13 Russians. The likelihood of those you would need to extradite, if the Russians unless they decide to show up and be served, you'd have to indict them. We don't have any extradite them. And we don't have any extradition treaty with Russia. So Mueller knew that this was never going to court. Now, the 3 companies, some people say this is the mistake that Mueller made by indicting companies because they can just hire a lawyer. And they did. One of the companies did. And, they said that we're going to take this to court. And then Mueller was like, oh, my God. And it looks like he panicked a little bit. And he went to the judge and asked for a postponement of the trial. And that made it clear. I mean, from the beginning, it always looked like those were a PR stunt. But when he was called on it and wasn't ready to go to court, then it sort of really exposed it as kind of like Trump calls it, fake, the whole thing fake. It really did make it look fake. So we still don't know what's going to happen with that.
But that's the only important to know for people who aren't following this every day, and God bless you. That is the only group of people who have been actually indicted for something to do directly with the 2016 election. And so even the case that has something directly to do with it is pretty weak and is having problems in court already. Already Mueller has asked for special rules for the discovery process because one of these Russian companies called his bluff and asked for discovery. And so now Mueller has backtracked and said, well, I don't want to do this in open court, which is interesting because you indicted them. But so they're the only ones who've been indicted for something to do with the election. All the rest of the people who have been in these slew of indictments, none of it's been for the election. So Russiagate, as of yet, has not led to any criminal prosecutions of Trump campaign affiliates with anything to do with 2016 election meddling, hacking, whatever.
There's actually some more interesting context with the Internet Research Agency indictments, because when those were first announced, Facebook was like, they looked into it, and I think he's a vice president and executive in Facebook, Rob Goldman, said that they looked at them and they really didn't agree that these were even designed to sway the election. And at least that was not their main goal. In fact, it looked like what they were trying to do is they would basically sell the services of a Twitter account that had a lot of followers. That really looked like what their whole gig was.
Yeah, it's like a sleazy marketing company in Russia that sells, like soft drinks and other things. Like they do ads, fake AstroTurf social media campaigns for crappy products, just like the U.S. companies do. So that's a lot of what the Internet Research Agency does. It's a business.
Right. There's a Moon of Alabama article where he, kind of explains the history of the Internet Research Agency. And apparently they at first sold bad school lunches. And so they kind of started out, gained better publicity and marketing. So because people are complaining about the terrible lunches he was selling. And this evolved into their marketing scheme where they're able to boost Yelp ratings or whatever for hire. You go out and you could either smear people or, gain following. And this seems to be much more lined up with, what the actual ads were that were running. But go ahead, Joanne.
They are shady, but they're shady in the way that you would totally recognize in the American context of some clickbait, social media guerrilla marketing, quote unquote, operation. They're not, people know who these people are. They're not like a secret KGB. I don't know, there's no KGB anymore. Sorry to say, FSB operation where it's like, wow, they're so secret. The Internet Research. No, it's like a place where people work and do. I wouldn't put it past them that they took government contracts, but that's generally what they are. They're not an unknown entity. They're kind of sleazy marketing people.
And then
Bernie makes a whole lot more sense if you're just trying to, get lights and clicks, not sway the election.
Yeah, with $100,000, over $1 billion, $2 billion was spent in marketing on the 2016 election. Let alone what happened that's a general election numbers, let alone what happened in the primaries. This is a major industry in America. The idea that $100,000 in Facebook ads that mostly occurred after the election, the idea that swung votes, I got to tell you, it's just ludicrous. I guess that's how I'd put it. And
then what happened after Rob Goldstone objected to Mueller's characterization of these Facebook ads was that Senator Mark Warner, he's the Democratic senator from Virginia, he got on a plane, he flew out to Facebook headquarters, and of course we don't know what he said to them, but Facebook sort of changed their mind after that, and they're like, oh yeah, we're so sorry. And what has come out of that? Well, a number of things have come out of it. But one of the things that came out of it is that now Facebook, they require people, if you buy an ad on Facebook, you now have to be authenticated. And it's sort of flagged. If it's political content, then it's flagged and Facebook reviews it before they even allow those ads. But so they implemented better tracking and attribution to Facebook ads so that in future elections, I guess they'll be able to, I'm not sure what they're going to do with that, to be honest.
Let's be clear what this was. Mark Warner, the senator from Virginia, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I think he's the ranking member on the Senate Intelligence Committee, meaning if the Senate switched over to Democrat controlled, he would become the chairman. He essentially, strong-armed Facebook.
Yeah.
and basically threatened them with regulation or some kind of consequence if they didn't get on board with Russiagate narrative. And Facebook, despite the evidence they had previously presented, switched gears and suddenly said, yes, we have a terrible problem. We're very sorry about this. And we're going to self-regulate rather than have the government regulate us.
And I think that's likely it's easy to threaten Google, Facebook, to all these things now. They're so big. All you have to do is threaten to use antitrust.
And they're afraid of the government. That's the one people they are afraid of. So when a senator flies in and gets in their face and says, how dare you undermine one of our key narratives here, it probably scared the Zuckerberg and the rest to say, geez, we better get on board with this thing. But in any case, it doesn't change the facts of the kind of joke of a charge it is that these people influenced a major election, especially given most of their ads ran after the election, which by definition, you can't influence the outcome of an event that already happened. But it's just a kind of a joke. So it's like the one thing that they can hang on, like, yes, we did indict someone who we're accusing of actually interfering in the election. But every other indictment so far has been about, bad conduct. Paul Manafort didn't pay his taxes for the money he was getting from the Ukrainian president. That's illegal. So I'm not saying it's not a real charge. It just has nothing to do with something that happened years later in the presidential campaign, which he was fired from.
So before we move on to the Trump Tower meeting, I just want to go back to the Flynn indictment real quick. And I kind of lost track of this story, but it was Israel that was actually trying to use Flynn to influence the Russians and not the Russians that were trying to influence the Americans. And wasn't Flynn actually doing something with Turkey that he wasn't supposed to be doing?
Yes. Okay. All right. This is important. So let's break this down. So Flynn was acting. This is really complicates the collusion narrative. Flynn was acting as an unregistered agent of Turkey, meaning he was lobbying on behalf of the Turkish government, but he had not complied with a regulation known as FARA, or the Foreign Agent Registration Act. So, for instance, a lot of people who lobby for foreign governments will actually register because they're getting paid and they have to register under FARA. And you can search FARA and see who's lobbying for Saudi Arabia, like former Senator Norm Coleman from Minnesota lobbies for Saudi Arabia. He has to disclose that. Dick Gephardt, the former House Minority Leader, at least at one time, has lobbied for Turkey. So Flynn, but you know that because you can look in the registry. Flynn did something that a lot of these shady operators in D.C. do, which is he never registered, which, by the way, was never really enforced. That's why it was par for the course. Now, personally, I think it should be enforced. So maybe that's actually there's stories in Politico and other outlets that a lot of lobbyists are crapping their pants after Flynn got indicted for this because they are all lobbying for foreign governments and they didn't register either. So he got hit for that. That charge seems to have faded away somewhere. I'm not sure what happened with that. He did eventually he registered, but he registered late. He registered after he got called on it, which is not really how the law works. It's not like, you only have to, if I catch you, then you register. You're supposed to register beforehand. So he violated that with Turkey. The negotiation that was occurring, Russia was facing sanctions related to their quote unquote meddling in the 2016 election. There was a question of what is Russia going to do in response to Obama's sanctions. And Flynn talked to the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, saying, hold off, wait till we get in there. He also, working on behalf of the Israelis, although he wasn't paid, as far as I know. Remember, Flynn was getting paid by Turkey to represent them, like a lot of these lobbyists. I don't know if he was getting paid by Israel. There's no evidence that I've heard that he was being paid by Israel. But he, on behalf of Israel, which Jared Kushner and other Trump people were doing, was trying to lean on Russia to help veto this resolution going before the UN about Israel's settlement activity, which the U.S. was not going to veto, which meaning Israel would be condemned at the UN for illegal settlement building. And so he was tasked by Israel and the Trump campaign, who was pro-Israel, to try to help the Russians veto it. Because they knew Obama wasn't going to do that. So Flynn was an unregistered agent of Turkey and was lobbying on Israel's behalf, although that was probably in conjunction with Trump policy. And then he lied reportedly, although it's a question now if this charge is going to stand, reportedly lied to investigators about what he told Sergei Kislyak. And famously, he apparently had denied it. And someone who must have had high rank leaked the intercept the NSA made. The NSA, the National Security Agency, says they were only tapping the Russian ambassador, not Flynn, and they therefore inadvertently caught this conversation. Someone got a hold of it, almost certainly an Obama appointee. My guess is John Brennan, but that's not confirmed. Or someone in the Trump campaign who didn't like Flynn, who knows, then leaked it to the Washington Post, and David Ignatius ran a column on it, which is what brought attention to it and ultimately got Flynn fired because not only had he apparently lied to the FBI, he also lied reportedly to President or Vice President Pence. So Flynn was working on behalf of or pursuing the interests of two foreign governments and arguably the Trump administration, both in lobbying to get Russia to veto the resolution condemning Israel and whatever he was doing with Turkey. So Flynn's got a lot of stuff going on. But let's be clear, none of those things, while shady and inappropriate, have anything to do with the 2016 election. That's as best I can do it, Joanne.
Yeah, there's also the interesting thing that happened with James Woolsey. Woolsey was for a period of time, he was advising the Trump campaign. And Woolsey was apparently in a meeting with Flynn, where Flynn supposedly discussed using some type of an extraction team to take Fethullah Gulen out of Pennsylvania and extradite him, or whatever you call that.
Right. Gulen is, for background, first off, Woolsey is a former CIA director, if we would know who James Woolsey is. But Gulen is this guy who runs a lot of charter schools in the United States. But there was a coup or self-coup, depending on who you believe. There was this event in Turkey where President Erdogan was in danger of being overthrown. There's famous video of F-16s firing on the troops and army troops being arrested and everything. So there's this coup that happened in Turkey. And Erdogan blames this guy in Pennsylvania, the Poconos, Gulen, for being part of it. And he wants him extradited to Turkey, where he'll almost certainly be executed. And Flynn was working, part of the way he earned his money from Turkey was to lobby to get this guy extradited. Now, Gulen, it's interesting, is in this kind of weird gray zone of intelligence operations where he's not actually a U.S. citizen. It's not clear what his immigration status is. It's all very spooky in a sense. It's CIA-ish.
Very, very spooky.
Very spooky. So that's what Woolsey's saying. Woolsey's saying that Flynn, as part of his unregistered lobbying, was talking about getting rid of Gulen.
Yeah, which would be a pretty serious crime. And Woolsey said that he actually reported that to Joe Biden. So,
that coup was a really crazy event, with like Erdogan going on FaceTime, I think, and like addressing the nation and telling them to go out and take on the coup plotting Turkish soldiers in the streets. And since he's been on a rampage, putting people in jail, purges, over 100,000 people dismissed from their jobs, tens of thousands imprisoned. And he's been demanding several times that the U.S. extradite Gulen, and he seems really convinced or is really motivated to get him back to Turkey. And Erdogan has seized a lot of power in Turkey since, and I think there's a big election coming up this weekend.
Yep.
In Turkey, that would give Erdogan even more power. And this is, of course, after I think his main presidential opponent in the race has been imprisoned by Erdogan for the past few months. So it's looking like he's probably going to do pretty well in that election.
We should note that coup attempt, it was a really big deal. It did some serious damage to relations between Russia and the United States. But you know what? You know what had happened? It happened on July 15th, 2016. So that 2016 election campaign period, there were so many things going on, including the attempted Turkish coup. But supposedly, Flynn, when the person who he had done work for, or he'd taken a substantial amount of money, like $500,000, that it wasn't just, there was a businessman involved with that. And there was also an Israeli tie to it. It was like a Turkish businessman fronting for an Israeli businessman. It was quite tangled
shady,
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I mean, it's typical DC, like intrigue and whatnot. And, he, once again, I think people who are actively working for a foreign government should register. But this has nothing to do with Russiagate. In fact, it disproves the idea that he's like a Kremlin agent, because the Russians have a complicated relationship with Turkey. For those who forget, we almost had World War III over Syria when the Turks shot down a Russian jet. Turkey is a member of NATO for some reason. It's pretty far from the North Atlantic.
It's the location.
Okay, right. So Incirlik is a major U.S. base, which is why the U.S. silence during that coup or self-coup or whatever it was is kind of interesting. But in any case, the Turks and the Russians have a complicated relationship. If you're acting as I just question, I think the Flynn unregistered lobbying for Turkey really complicates the Russiagate narrative.
Right. And the last thing I'll just know on the Flynn part is that I think it's Flynn's company that would be in trouble because they were the ones being paid. And his son is either like the president or a big board member of the company. And so if you're looking at Flynn taking a plea deal with the FBI, it seems like he has an awful lot to lose. And I just think that's worth mentioning here is that.
That's a good point. You're saying you think they use the son as leverage?
On top of everything else, I mean, maybe they said you just want to keep this whole Turkey thing out of it and plead guilty to lying about, what I mean?
Right.
Not specifically lean on the son, but yeah, that would be a part of it. Cause as you're saying, I mean, this would be a big deal,
It's definitely a crime to not register. So,
right.
And Kyle, it wouldn't be the only time either that Mueller operated in this way. The rumor is that Flynn was threatened with worse if he didn't agree to plead guilty to lying to the FBI. There's also, I think it's in the FBI text, and actually James Comey admitted it to Congress, if I'm remembering correctly. The FBI agents who interviewed Flynn said after the interview that they didn't think he was lying. So, that was interesting. But the other time that, and this is actually an allegation, that it's not proven, but George Papadopoulos, and we'll get into more about him in a bit. Very recently, his wife came out. We haven't heard anything from Papadopoulos since he pled guilty to lying to the FBI. But she says that Papadopoulos pled guilty to lying. It was like some minor thing, like the date that he met with Alexander Downer or something. It was like an inconsequential thing that he lied about, it seemed. But his wife went on cable news and was interviewed, and she said that the reason why he pled to the lying charge was because they had threatened to charge him with having acted as an unregistered agent of Israel. Again, the FARA legislation, which frankly, the FARA, they don't ever actually enforce that. And if they did,
they selectively enforce it.
Yeah. So it's interesting that Mueller threatens FARA in two different cases of people he's indicted, and then he gets them to plead to what John Kiriakou calls throwaway charges of lying to the FBI, though they're substantial in the potential sentences. But so that if his wife is telling the truth, then it wouldn't be the only time that Mueller, got people to plead guilty to something because he threatens them with something else. And in fact, the FARA thing, we don't even know how that would play in court. But obviously these two people were worried about it.
Right. You could get so many people on it. That's what I'm saying is it's so commonplace in D.C. for people to take money from foreign governments and lobby on their behalf and not register that, like I said, the Politico and other people run stories that all these lobbyists in D.C. are freaking out because a lot of them have taken money, probably from the same foreign governments, Israel, Turkey, other places, and not registered because it's so commonplace to break that rule, which also means, of course, if you're a prosecutor with this kind of, unfettered mandate that Mueller appears to have, you can probably get a lot of people on that charge or at least use it as leverage because so many people are breaking it.
Right. So if we're done with the indictments, I think it's probably a good time to move on to the Trump Tower meeting. I don't think any indictments have came out of it, but whenever I hear people talk about it, they say, oh, this is the one where the Trump administration tried to buy or get information from the Russians, and to use against Hillary Clinton. So, is it true?
I mean, it's so, all of this is so funny, but, So this meeting's set up with this concert promoter who
He's
says
a music publicist. Yeah,
music publicist.
Rob Goldstone.
Rob Goldstone, who is says in this email. You can see the emails because they're part of a congressional record. And Donald Jr., the stuttering Dauphin, the heir apparent, emailed this stuff out. And this guy's talking about this music publicist is saying he's got connections to the, quote, Crown prosecutor. Now, anybody who knows anything about Russian history knows that the Crown prosecutor hasn't existed since the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, when they got rid of the Crown violently, if I recall my history correctly. So there's no Crown prosecutor. But he says they have information. He's hyping this meeting. What's her name? Nyaskaya, I believe the woman's name is. She's a lawyer. She's going to have this dirt on Hillary.
It's Natalia Veselnitskaya.
Veselnitskaya. They have this meeting, and the whole thing's a big setup. And because they get into this meeting, and she's not really there. She doesn't have any dirt on Clinton. She actually is there to lobby against this something called the Majinsky Act, which is pushed by this a hedge fund guy, Bill Browder. It has something to do with he says his former business partner was persecuted and hurt in Russia. I think that probably happened. And so it's this very belligerent sanctions bill. And she's upset and she wants the future Trump administration to back off on it. But there's no actual information. And Donald Jr. and the other people in the room quickly realize that they've been essentially set up, that this guy, this music publicist, has conned them, which doesn't speak well of them, into taking this meeting. And she has no real information. Now, it has nothing to do with here's, I guess, how you could look at it. You could say it's evidence of bad intentions. That's what I think the Trump Tower meeting, you could say with some evidence. Like, he was looking for dirt on Clinton, and he was willing to get it from anywhere, including someone who said they represented the Crown prosecutor. So, I mean, that is intent, arguably. But in terms of any actual collusion activity, none of that occurred. We're not sure her relationship with the Russian government, but there was no dirt given out. It was a lobbying effort against this very unpopular sanctions act called the Majinsky Act. So it's the best, I guess, Russiagate people are going to have. I guess they're going to have to move the goalposts, and when they don't have the actual conspiracy or collusion or anything sinister, to just say, well, they were tried to. Right? They can say, like, well, they tried to. And I guess that's what the Trump Tower meeting kind of represents. It doesn't, what do you think, Joanne?
The thing is, Veselnitskaya has been lobbying about the Magnitsky Act for a long time, and the guy, Rob Goldstone, who set up this meeting, like, there's a kind of a crazy chain here. He set it up on behalf of this Russian music star, Aglarov, and they don't really even know what this damaging information is, because it's been kind of like sketchy. He was told that there was information from a well-connected Russian attorney, and that they had some information that could be damaging to Hillary. But he doesn't have any information. He doesn't have any idea like what that is. And when he was questioned about it, then he sort of like backed down. He's like, where's the word he used? He said, I had puffed it up. I had puffed it and used some keywords that I thought would attract Don Jr.'s attention. Publicists puff is how they get meetings.
Right. So, they found the weak link in the chain, which is Don Jr., which is someone who would actually be, and this is what Steve Bannon, the Trump campaign manager, later said about this in that book, Fire and Fury, from which he was fired from Breitbart News and the rest, is he said, like, this, only an idiot would take this meeting at Trump Tower. Like, this guy's an idiot, which I think is really, Joanne, I don't know what your view on this is, but that's my kind of final analysis on it, is like, he's an idiot for taking this meeting, or he's like not disciplined enough to understand that you're not supposed to take this meeting. But it's a nothing burger in terms of content, because he didn't get any information. There was no actual dirt on Clinton exchanged. Whether that would even be a crime is another question. But I do think it does show that he's kind of a fool. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah,
probably after all this, probably the most damaging thing is that Donald Trump Jr. jumped at it. He said something like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to have that," and took the meeting. And they were being told this information, comes from Russian officials or the Russian government. And like, he didn't apparently even think twice about that. He's like ready to go for it. Now, I don't think it's actually illegal to
No, I don't think it is
either. So, but still, a lot of these things, all of Russiagate, I would argue, is being it's really not designed for a real court. It's designed for the court of public opinion.
Right. And that's where the Trump Tower meeting is key, is it shows intent to do something stupid. Or do something.
I should say that that's not completely true, right? Because there are some real hard indictments here of lying to the FBI.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with like Russia. Like, it has nothing, like the reason Trump Tower meeting gets paraded around, and I think will ultimately be the high watermark, or likely to be the high watermark of the Trump collusion narrative, or like, the kind of, Trump Tower, that's all I need to hear. Like, the people are going to move the goalposts and just kick that through the field, through the field goal and be like, that's it. That's Russiagate. But it's because it shows an intention. But in terms of actual any kind of collusion, it doesn't show anything, because this was just some rogue publicist, or really not a rogue publicist, doing his job. It's his job to get these meetings set up. So he puffed up a meeting with someone connected. It's going to help your dad become president. And somehow, apparently, you can, if you just send a random email to Don Jr. and other people at the Trump campaign promising this, you get a meeting, which speaks to, I think, a larger issue with the Trump campaign, which was it was chaotic. That's how you get someone like Carter Page as an advisor who becomes a big figure in Russiagate. That's how you get Paul Manafort, who's kind of a disgraced figure within D.C. He's this sleazy lobbyist. He hasn't been a major player in the U.S. politics for a long time. That's how you get a lot of these shady weirdo characters that glommed on to the Trump campaign because none of the other Republicans would touch it. So I just think it's a evidence of a lack of discipline and a lack of good judgment, but it is not evidence of collusion.
That's an important point, that his campaign advisors and his whole staff were sort of cobbled together. First of all, with the campaign itself, he was trying to keep it to a bare minimum, and it was a close circle, and they ran a very skinny campaign. But the other thing that was happening is that certainly in the foreign policy establishment, some of the more prominent people in that establishment, even publicly, you could see them making arguments like, don't work for this guy, don't sign on to this campaign. They did the same thing with the administration. They were trying to, starve him of credible people on his campaign. And also, I think some of them were genuinely worried that they were going to just completely burn their reputations if they got involved with him. So, which
led to a hilarious post-election scramble, by the way, when all these people tried to delete their old tweets and delete their Facebook posts and delete all these blog posts so they could try to get a job with the Trump administration. Just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, I mean, some did, but I think most of them would still not even go near the Trump administration. And now over the years, we'll see how that evolves. But yeah, certainly, what was it? Elliot Abrams, one of the most famous and powerful neocons. Wasn't he the one who went back and scrubbed his tweets?
Yep.
He wanted a job.
And he did want a job. In fact, he wanted a big job. He wanted the number 2 job at the State Department. Number 2? Yeah, I think. Because some of the things that were done with the State Department organizationally would have made that a particularly powerful position. And Trump, I guess, thought about it, and then he considered what this guy had said about him during the campaign, and he's like, nah. And then Elliot Abrams went back to trashing Trump again.
Which is funny, because Elliot Abrams was actually, I think he was indicted but not convicted of lying during Iran-Contra, or maybe he was convicted and then pardoned. In any case, I mean, if this is the bulwark of virtue who won't dare work for this sullied administration. Anyways, total side point. Yeah, but I think Elliot Abrams was one of the people who, let's see, what was controversial to his conviction in 1991 on 2 misdemeanor counts of unlawfully withholding information from Congress during the Iran-Contra affair. So that's Elliot Abrams. So even the pardoned neocons of D.C. were trashing Trump. So maybe that's why he had to rely on these people, or felt he needed that's where Carter Page, who we have to talk about, I guess, at some point, because he's such a strange character in the Russiagate narrative. But that's where he comes in. Like, they don't have the backbenchers in the typical Republican Party apparatus will not work for Trump. So he cobbles together, that's a good word, all these rejects and weirdos to be on in sort of burnouts and D-listers like Paul Manafort to run the campaign.
Right. And I don't think Michael Flynn is known as the brightest general, out there. But, maybe this is since, we are talking about, trying to get information from foreign countries, would be a good time to talk about Fusion GPS and the dossier, and how that was at a time going to be the proof of Russian collusion, that, the Russians had this tape of Donald Trump apparently hiring some hookers to pee on a bed that the Obamas once slept on. I mean, they really went all out with that story. Had they said that Trump went to Russia and hired some hookers, I would have believed it. No doubt. But, they get into they peed on the bed that the Obama stayed on and stuff. But, I think it's a good time to mention this part of the story.
Right. The role of the Steele dossier, this guy, Christopher Steele, former MI6, which is the equivalent of the British CIA. Obviously, James Bond is MI6 for those who follow some of the movies and whatnot. So he's a former intelligence operative. He's now working for this sort of private opposition research / intelligence firm called Fusion GPS, which was originally contracted to do opposition research on Trump by the Washington Free Beacon, which is a outlet controlled largely by Paul Singer, who's a billionaire hedge fund neocon guy, real hardcore on U.S. foreign policy, Likudnik, close with Netanyahu. He originally hired Fusion GPS to do opposition research on Trump to hurt him in the primaries, because Paul Singer and the Washington Free Beacon were aligned with Marco Rubio, if people remember that name, who Trump fenestrated rather distinctly in the primaries. And so after that happened, Fusion GPS then was hired by a law firm associated that worked for the Clinton campaign. And Christopher Steele, using his contacts with both Russia and the FBI, he knew people in the U.S. intelligence world previously. He had done previous work, including work regarding Russia, and compiled what I've heard described as kind of raw intel, that and plus, if anybody knows anything about opposition research is just tell me anything terrible you've heard about this person. And then you write it down in a report, and then it's handed off to somebody, and then for further review. So this is kind of raw stuff. I'm not saying this wasn't a smear job anyway, but the Steele dossier isn't really vetted. It's like what some people told him. Those people could have had their own motivations, by the way. Maybe Russian intelligence was having fun with him, telling him about a P tape. Maybe he was purposely trying to tilt it in the direction of sensational stories. We don't know exactly. Chris Steele's not talking. So we don't know exactly what motivated him and how he feels about and how the report was compiled, or what the motivations from some of the sources were. In any case, Steele ends up working with the FBI. They create a relationship. But then as the election approaches, he starts leaking information to the press, and the FBI reportedly severs the relationship because they had an agreement that he would not leak anything or talk to the press before the election. In any case, the dossier plays some kind of role. Is it the primary role? That's what a lot of Republicans believe, or want to believe, or are alleging at least, because that would mean that the entire Mueller investigation is a result of a opposition research document from the Hillary Clinton campaign. In any case, it certainly was used to justify a wiretap of Carter Page. The Steele dossier was ground. So when it went to the FISA court, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, right? They created this special court after this is, I think, a church committee reform. After the CIA and the FBI were caught tapping everyone's phones without a warrant, they said, okay, we'll create a special court for foreign intelligence operations only. And we'll have a panel of judges who almost never say no. And so they went to the FISA court to get a wiretap on Carter Page, who is a U.S. citizen. And the part of the justification for that wiretap, we now know, was the Steele dossier. And it was not disclosed, reportedly, that it was not a objective intelligence document. It was an opposition research document from another campaign. So the Steele dossier, now the allegations, some of the things that are in the Steele dossier have been proven to be incorrect on a technical level. And some of the things are impossible to disprove at the moment, such as the P-tape. So I don't know if there's a P-tape. Joanne, if you have some insight on this, I'm all ears. But it is an opposition research document. It's raw intel. None of it's confirmed, or much of it's not confirmed. It's based on human sources talking to this guy. And it was used by the FBI and the CIA, or at least the FBI, as part of their investigation. And the question, I guess, that hangs in the air that we still don't know is this the primary instigation for the investigation for Crossfire Hurricane? They say no. They say Papadopoulos is the primary. But in any case, the Steele dossier has been used in court documents to justify wiretapping Trump campaign associates. So it's an integral part to understanding the story. But in terms of the allegations in the Steele dossier, they're not proven. And some of them have already been proven to be false, which is why prior to BuzzFeed's publication, everyone in the DC area who had seen a copy of it kind of just was like, we can't run with this. It's not, it's not verified. We can't run this story. And then so BuzzFeed decided, well, we'll just publish it raw and see what happens.
Yeah, and it's actually another cobbled together thing. It's 17 different memos. Steele was, I guess, sending these memos in. I think the first one is dated June 20th, 2016. And then, it continues through the summer. It gets passed. I mean, it gets out through multiple different. It's definitely going all around in the media. John McCain has it, and it takes a while before it actually gets back to the FBI, supposedly. It even gets to, it's in the State Department. It's really kind of crazy. Some of the the Steele dossier, one big part of it is like a description of Abby Martin's show on RT from 2 years prior. I think I think she hasn't even been on RT for like 2 years when they're using this as evidence of, it's just crazy. And some people, especially the Democrats, are still saying, well, a lot of the Steele dossier, it hasn't been proven wrong yet. They use the double negative thing. But it's as a lot of things in the Russiagate thing, when you talk about it in meta before you've actually seen the actual details of it, it sounds serious and it sounds scary and it sounds damning. But then when you actually see the information, if they can't keep it covered up, saying that it's classified or whatever, when you actually look at it, it's very problematic.
So that wraps up episode 1 of the 3-part series here. We did record this all in one sitting, so you'll notice that it's starting the next 2 episodes, and at the end of these, there's not going to be like goodbyes or introductions, because we just kind of like, kept going and kept talking. So the next episode will pick up right where we left off here. But for those of you who are Patreons and donate to the show, which is essential in helping the show to grow, I am going to publish the entire full length, is like 2 hours or so, conversation that I had with Joanne and Dan. And you can find that at any time there. So if you're really excited and you're really enjoying this, you don't have to wait all the way till Friday to get the full conversation. You could go on and download it right away at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. For those of you who don't want to donate but want to help the show out and share the show, I really do appreciate that as well. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com and libertarianinstitute.org. Twitter is at KYAAALE. Facebook, Libertarian Union, and then my personal website is immersionnews.com, and then you could find the YouTube page and the BitChute page is Immersion News. I'll also remind you that the guests on the show, Joanne and Dan, their podcast is Around the Empire, and that could be found at aroundtheempire.com, and they have a Patreon page as well for those of you who wish to support their great work.